people because the people that they took the initial goods from to be able to supply government were not paid. So then they no longer are willing to extend credit to them. They have to pay money up front. And many a business has been destroyed because of irresponsible financial management of a country's affairs. And that is why one of the reasons that I want to emphasize what the Honourable Member had shared earlier is that we must never, ever go back down this road again. The damage is too great. But what I particularly wanted to speak to today is a question that was raised to me by my constituents. When we discuss taxes and taxation, when we discuss waivers on taxes, when we discuss raising taxes on X or Y, very often it is difficult for the regular population to follow the policy behind it, to understand the reasoning behind it, to see how it fits into a strategy. They just know they like it or it hurts them, and therefore they don't like it. And so it can create confusion, and that confusion often leaves room for mischievous people to try to characterize government's policy in a very negative light. And if you have the time, I'm sure you don't, as the rest of us don't, but I hear the comments from others. When you listen to the radio where people are commenting on it, when you watch the newspapers and social media and see the mischaracterization of government's tax policy, you recognize that people don't readily understand how taxes are developed, why they're shaped the way they're shaped. And our Prime Minister says on many occasions that tax policy and the way in which taxes are to be spent are a matter of choice. It has to do with what are your priorities and what is important to you. So sometimes people ask the question, but why is it that in the United States, for example, things are so cheap? Or people might ask the question, why in England taxes have to be so high? Some people may ask in Barbados, why in Barbados government can't start to give people more of this and more of that? And sometimes we've not always taken the time to explain some of the parameters underlying tax policy. So this is what I share when I am confronted with that question. Each country decides what is important to them. And by country, it's not just the government, it's the population that decides what is important to them. So in America, America takes a position that they want government out of their business. They want government out of the bedroom, they want them out of business, they want them out of family life, they want them even not to interfere too much at the state level, the federal government not to interfere at the state level, because they feel that the individuals should drive every aspect of their lives except those that are impossible so to do as an individual. They believe people should be able to keep more of their own money in their own pockets. And because that is the underlying belief governing how the United States does its tax, they have developed a structure where they have decided that in the United States, they are prepared to pay high salaries so that the individual can do more for himself or herself by making the determination as to which doctor they want to go to, how much health care they would like, what school they want to send their child to, so that they can make those personal decisions. And in exchange for that, they want to be able to opt for a low tax, but in addition to that, low social services. In other words, if the individual is not prepared to pay high taxes, then instead of government providing for the individual a number of services that we, for example, take for granted, they opt to have fewer services provided by government, and allow the individual to keep that money that they can determine what it is they want to have in their lives. Now, there are many in America that may not agree with that approach. That's why you constantly hear the battle over Medicaid. That's why you constantly hear the battle over a single-payer option for the provision of medical services. That's why you constantly hear the talk about having the schools and zoning and where people can go to school, etc. Those battles are fought because there is an underlying discomfort with some of the positions that may be taken in relation to high salaries, low taxes, and low services. Now, across the pond, people have taken a completely different approach in relation to tax. They have decided, and this would be like England and Sweden, they have decided that the only way to safeguard access to a basic set of services that gives everybody a good common start, that allows them to be able to advance based on what they wish to do, but ensuring that there is a floor below which a family does not fall, they have opted to create a government that will provide a high level of social services. But in order to do that, it means high taxes. And in order for there to be high taxes, salaries are also put into the mix. But that is because a place like the UK or Sweden, they have the economic growth to allow for high taxes, high salaries, and a high provision of social services. So, for example, in those territories, you will find that they not only have free health care for everyone, they have free education up to tertiary level, they provide special maternity benefits, they supply money for each child that you have, they supply housing, they supply special retirement benefits to help to aid their pensioners, they also put in things for child care and so on. The reason why the Europeans go after the huge set of social services is because they believe that everybody should have a living standard at a basic level that allows people to have at least a minimum of security in the types of goods and services that they can acquire to take care of their lives. But that means taxation is high, salaries are high. Now, for small nations like Barbados, like the Caribbean region, developing countries, we do not have the economic growth to sustain high salaries with high taxes and high social services. We opted for a different model because we were coming or emerging from out of a plantation economy. We were emerging from out of a position of colonialism. You had a large proportion of your population earning a minimum wage, and you did not have this type of development, the infrastructural development on the ground that was necessary for the benefit of the population. Hence, governments took up the position that in the matter of taxation, this was the policy they were going to adopt. That one, they needed their enterprises to be able to build up sufficient money and generate sufficient employment within that country so as to allow people to get work. So government opted to put high taxes on the corporate sector in order to be able to get sufficient money to be able to do the infrastructural development that was necessary in our underdeveloped economies. What that meant is because our trade was extremely limited, and because we had a limited number of goods that we traded in, and therefore the economy would have been sensitive to major fluctuations, the trade-off was to offer lower salaries than the person would be able to command in North America or command in the United States, because we simply did not have the economic growth to sustain both the high services and high salaries at the same time. What this did is that although in similar positions we worked for less than half of our counterparts in another country, we enjoy a high level of provision of social services. So within our countries, the ordinary citizen is able to be guaranteed that they will get free education all the way up to tertiary. They know that they're going to have sanitation services without having to pay extra for it, as they have to do in European countries. They're able to get postal services, roads can be fixed, and a number of services can be put on the ground to assist the average person in the society to be able to command at least a basic standard of living. But our trade-off for the low salaries and the high social services was that we would pay high levels of tax. And this has served us well in the Caribbean because it has allowed government to play the role to be able to develop the economy, to be able to put the necessary infrastructural things in place that would allow the country to be able to grow socially, so people's needs are met, will be able to grow in its financial and economic development so that it can attract new investment and be able to build new trade outlets for their goods and services. And these are some of the benefits that we have derived because of this particular equation. Now, one of the questions that was raised while we were dealing with our tax policy, and people were discussing the issue about whether or not we could afford to provide health and education and whether we should continue to do it. Should we start to charge people for services? That discussion, when that came up, that led to the fact that one of the things that is needed in Barbados is that there needs to be a conversation where citizens begin to understand that the level of social services which we are able to enjoy through our taxes, that level is determined by how well the economy is functioning and how well it is performing. That there is not a situation where citizens can keep demanding more and more service without being willing to pay more and more taxes to be able to produce that service, or so grow their economy that enough money is earned through the tax revenues, that those tax revenues keep growing because the economy is growing, and therefore able to sustain the quality of services which citizens want to enjoy. And I believe that conversation is important because I think that over time, citizens begin to believe that getting social services is just a matter of pressuring government to make sure that it happens. It goes deeper than that. That as a citizenry, as a country, we have to sit down and ask ourselves, what are the social services that are important to us? What are we prepared to pay in order to have the delivery of those services? And how am I, the individual, how am I going to contribute to the growth of the economy so that that revenue is provided so that the services which I expect can be had? That's a conversation that we need to have, and we need to have deeply. So one of the things I think that we need to bear in mind, therefore, is that the conversation now will include not just the discussion on the tax, not just the discussion on the services, but a big discussion has to go around the issue of how we are going to grow the economy, that we can get those revenues to be able to satisfy the needs of our population. We are going to need to have sustained growth within the economy. Now, when people start to talk economics and they start to speak about fiscal deficits and they start to talk about GDP and so on, many citizens turn off because they don't believe it pertains to them. And this is unfortunate, and is something that we have an intention to correct by constantly dialoguing, that people can understand really what it means. For us in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, it has had a tremendous impact on how we go about doing business, on a day-to-day basis since we came into office. One of the signals that Prime Minister sent very early is that there has to be, while we're doing the mission-critical things, dealing with the sewage, dealing with the debt, dealing with the buses, dealing with sanitation services, that we also have to be able to walk and chew gum, and we have to be able to look at how are we going to get greater growth in the economy. And what Prime Minister would have laid out is a policy where you're looking at inward investment to create jobs, and that would have been shared a great deal. But she's also been looking at the absolute necessity to grow our enterprises to get export that you can get your tax revenues. And one of the areas for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade that we have been focusing on, we've been tasked to be able to find other jurisdictions that we can begin to open trade with. That our trade has to be able to shift from just focusing on trading with Europe, trading with the United States, trading with Canada. And we have to look to deepen the CARICOM trade. We have to look to deepen trade with Africa. We have to look at Latin America. We have to look at Asia. And this is what has kept the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade extremely busy over this period. That while the mission-critical things were taking place at home, a greater emphasis was put on how are we going to pursue greater trade with others that we can grow our tax revenues, so that we can meet the targets which we have. Because if we can do that, if we can grow our trade, then it gives government much more room for determining what they will do at the tax level. It will determine what percentages they will set. Because the more money you earn, the lower the percentage has to be in order to meet the social services needs that people have. And that is why growing our GDP is going to be critical to our tax policy. So we have focused on a number of countries which we want to engage more deeply in trade. Some of those countries were mentioned before, places like Guyana and Suriname. These are countries that provide tremendous opportunity for Barbadian enterprises to expand, not to relocate, but rather to expand and open new arms of business within those territories so that the additional earnings generated come back to Barbados and hit the tax revenues, and therefore provide government with more money to be able to provide the services which citizens are looking for. And so there has been an emphasis on reaching out to the CARICOM region in order to deepen our trade. But we've also gone after a place like Panama, Mr. Speaker, where we recognize that we have a large diaspora. We want to engage them in seeing Barbados as their home. We want them to see Barbados as a place that they can invest, Barbados as a place they can visit, Barbados as a place that they can do business. And we believe that if we can generate that business between Panama and Barbados, that what we will see is an improvement in our tax revenues. And this, again, will give government more options in relation to how it will tax, where it will tax. Africa was mentioned, and I don't have to repeat that, but that is very high on the agenda in terms of establishing not just a political presence, Mr. Speaker, but we're looking to establish a commercial presence in both of these territories. And one of the things that you will see shortly is that our missions will begin to develop more of a commercial type focus in terms of how our team, our ambassadors and so on, how they engage the country where they reside, how they engage them in the more aggressive promotion of trade opportunities for Barbadian businesses, and thus more tax revenue for Barbados. China presents a tremendous opportunity for Barbados in relation to the expansion of trade. And at this moment at UWI, you have a symposium going on looking at relationships between China and the Caribbean. And I'm happy to say that our ambassador to China is here to share with the participants at that particular forum, what are the business opportunities that we are going to be developing with China, and I'm trusting that that will go extremely well. But even though the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade seeks to build out new places for us to do business and to do trade, one of the things that the citizens have to engage in as part of their responsibility in the whole matter of how we build out Barbados and allow it to be able to provide for everyone, one of the things that we have to look at is how are we going to get higher productivity from our citizens, from our enterprises, and from the capital goods which we invest in. Transformation at all three levels is absolutely vital. Government gives tax incentives to companies to be able to bring in equipment, to bring in raw materials. They give them tax incentives for export. But if the companies are risk averse, if they do not pursue getting the best possible equipment and machinery that will raise productivity, if they don't pay attention to the systems and processes by which they're producing their goods and services, then all of those incentives are going to be in vain. We have a tax that we need to repeal, because an incentive that we need to repeal. One, because it is no longer compliant with our obligations under the treaties that we are involved in. And two, few people use it. And that is the area of research and development. And it's a pity because we needed to have more innovation taking place within Barbados. However, one of the things that is going to be important going forward is how are we going to transform our enterprises so that our enterprises are going to be able to build out their trade, that they can pay more in terms, contribute more towards the tax base of government, therefore giving government much more in terms of options as to how to tax people and provide services, and at the same time create prosperity for the citizen. One of the things that needs to happen is there needs to be higher productivity in our labor force. So along with capital improving processes, the equipment, and the effective use of their raw materials, it is important that every day employees go to work to give the productivity that will contribute to three things: the sustainability of the company, which means they're going to protect their jobs; sustainability of the tax base, so that the social services that we need for our children are going to be present; and to be able to sustain the opportunity for getting increased wages, which will allow them to prosper and fulfill their dreams. This is probably one of the more challenging tasks that we may have ahead of us in terms of transforming Barbados so it can meet its demands of the citizen. One of the things, and I believe it was mentioned by the Honourable Member for East Central, is the fact that you have pressures external to you that seek to tell you what kind of tax policy you can have, telling you what level of tax you can charge the businesses that are in your jurisdiction. They want to tell you how to run your country, despite the fact that this is a sovereign nation. You get pressures coming from trade agreements, which you have, where you may enter into a trade agreement where you may agree to the removal of tariffs that would normally earn revenue for the government. You get pressures to be able to remove those tariffs. But if you don't have the growth of your enterprises at the same time to compensate for the loss of tax, then a dip in that revenue will put government in a bad position to be able to provide social services for its citizens. And this is where it may have to tap back and add more tax onto incomes in the country. And that's where we don't want to go back to. So it is a conversation, Mr. Speaker, that I feel needs to, I don't know if we need to do it via town hall meetings. I don't know if we need to start and do a number of discussions on television. I don't know if we need to do public service announcements. But across this country, it is going to be necessary to have a conversation with our citizens about the matter of taxation, the provision of social services, and how we're going to create a future for our people. Without it, as we maneuver or try to adjust the challenges that we may encounter through the world system, and it may cause discomfort to maybe a section of the community. It could be businesses, it could be pensioners, it could be middle-class people. If they don't understand what is being done, then they just feel the pain and become discontented rather than participating meaningfully in the solution that will help to take us forward. And so I want to encourage every single Barbadian, even though it may be dry and boring, it is important to understand what it is the government is seeking to do in relation to shifting to the indirect taxation to allow Barbadians to keep a little more of their money in their pocket, and that we want them to be able to enjoy the fruits of their labor. But they also need to understand that we're seeking to do that within a context where we would have limited fiscal space, and therefore when we say you need to stay the course, it is because it may take time for us to get to a place where taxation can ease. It is also important for them to understand what is the role they have to play. And I just want to list a few things that I feel that as citizens we need to engage in that will help to make our policy work. One, it's important for citizens to understand that anything that we do in our daily lives that affects the cost of government by causing government's expense to rise is not in our best interest. Many citizens tend to treat government property or government projects as something that has nothing to do with them, not understanding that every time we drive up the cost of doing government, then what we are doing is creating a condition in which more taxes have to be charged in order to correct the situation. Therefore, I want to be able to appeal to Barbadians. One, on the issue of littering. It is important for us to develop responsible environmental behaviors, that it is necessary for us not to create work for sanitation workers. It is important in the schools that our children do not destroy and mash up the school plant, because every time it is damaged, we have to look for more tax revenues to be able to repair it. We want our citizens to understand, even in the matter of water and water resource management, that all of us have a role that we need to play. In relation to the hospital, in relation to the equipment that is used all throughout the public service, that if we take better care of that equipment, if we do the necessary maintenance, it reduces the cost of government and therefore reduces pressure on our tax revenues and allows the Barbadian economy to grow, because we can direct our resources to other things rather than the replacement of things, because we have not exercised the care. And then the most important thing, that every day that we get up and we have a job to go to work to do, it is absolutely important that that job is done well. What is often not understood, Mr. Speaker, is that sometimes people feel that if I'm being paid $2,000 a month to do my job, if I work fast, I still get $2,000. If I work slow, I still get $2,000. Then a lot of people feel that whether I work fast or slow, then it doesn't matter. So sometimes people treat their jobs and the output from their jobs as though it is not critical to the entire economy and therefore critical to them and their lives. But people need to realize that if government is paying $2,000 to a person to execute a job, and it needed to be executed within a week, but that person takes 2 months to do that job, then instead of, if we divide their salary by the number of weeks, it would have taken government $500 to have that job executed had it been done in a week. If you take 2 months, it takes $4,000 to do the job. And if time is important, then you force government to hire another person or 3 more persons to try to get a job done that should only have taken 1 week.
Your Honourable Member has 2 more minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The impact of that is that government then finds itself raising its expenses, trying to meet the ordinary needs of the citizens in the provision of public services in a situation where they're not getting the productivity. And where do they find the additional money to pay 3 more persons to do a job that should only take 1? It comes from taxes, Mr. Speaker. Taxes have to be raised, and when they're raised, it creates increase in prices because taxation has a price. It must go somewhere, and it will end up on your goods, and it will end up on your services. And therefore, the person who does not produce actually contributes to the high cost of living in a nation, therefore making it more difficult for everyone to enjoy their lives because everything costs so much more and creates pressure in homes and creates poverty in some of our families. So therefore, productivity in the civil service is important. Productivity in the private sector is equally important. One of the things, Mr. Speaker, is that absenteeism has a tremendous impact on our economy. And when people don't turn up for work and the output in that enterprise is not achieved, it holds back the country. It causes the tax revenues to shrink. And when those shrink, social services are then affected. So we as citizens have a role to play. We as citizens have a contribution that we make every day to the quality of our own lives. That when we work, it is not just the salary that we take home, but it is in the contribution to the tax base. It is in the contribution to helping a company grow and be able to generate profit so that when they create profit, corporation taxes can rise. And this is what is going to be needed going forward. So this is going to call for a whole country effort. This effort is not just the effort of 30 people in a parliament. It is not just the job of the person who owns the business, but every single citizen, whether they work in the public or the private sector, have a tremendous role to play in bringing Barbados out from where we are by each person producing as much as they can, reducing the costs in their businesses, reducing the costs in the civil service, and giving of their best every single day. And when we are able to do that, and when we're able to take advantage of the trade opportunities to grow our businesses, Mr. Speaker, you then find that the pot becomes bigger, and once the pot is bigger, there is more to share. There is more that we can do at the level of social services. So I want to commend the Honourable Member for the Land Tax Amendment Bill. I want to thank the Ministry of Finance for its foresight and insight in looking at changing what we're doing in relation to tax policy and the skillful management of our affairs in this very difficult situation. And I want again to encourage our citizens, let us work together, let us pull together, let us stay the course, and let us do what is in the best interest of ourselves, best interest of our country, to ensure that prosperity is the lot of Barbados as it goes into the future. I'm obliged to you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable St. Michael South Central.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to give support to this land tax amendment bill, which seeks to amend the Land Tax Act to provide for write-off of certain penalties and interests, as well as a waiver of the amount payable as a penalty or interest on arrears of tax for a period of time. I do not endeavor in my brief intervention to cover too much of the ground that was covered by the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central, who certainly gave a very fulsome exposition of all related matters. What I will seek to do, sir, is to contextualize this measure as part of a series of measures that this government has been implementing in consultation with its partners, in consultation with the people who are affected every day. This is a Barbados Labour Party administration, sir, that listens to people's experiences, that listens to people's response to how policy is affecting them, and that seeks to be responsive and that is concerned and is focused on being caring and having as our mandate the well-being of every Barbadian and the development of the country. So this is one of a series of measures being implemented by the Ministry of Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment and the Government of Barbados. It is part of a reorientation, sir, of the tax system. It is an orientation that saw us converge our domestic and corporation tax rates so that we no longer effectively really have an international business sector or anything known as international business companies, but that everyone essentially pays the same effective tax rate within a band, corporation tax rate within a band of 1% to 5.5%. It means that as a growth measure, most major investors that establish companies or developments in Barbados are effectively likely to pay no more than 2% corporation tax. It creates opportunities for growth, not just directly, but in indirect ways. Because the savings that major corporations and other investors see from this kind of shift allow for them to invest in other areas that will address and improve productivity of its workers, that will allow companies to have more of a social impact on the communities in which they work and the communities they serve. And so this measure provides scope not just for us to be more competitive as a jurisdiction, but it provides scope for companies to be able to reinvest in their employees, in their businesses, and in becoming more productive and more competitive. But such measures, sir, are part of an overall orientation that mirrors really where the world is going in terms of our approach to the administration of tax. And it sees the government of Barbados shifting towards away from consumption tax and towards taxes on large assets and on transactions. And the thinking there is that such a reorientation of your tax system more evenly spreads the burden and removes the burden from those who are least able to afford increases in tax. And so these measures are a part of that reorientation and a part of how the government of Barbados is using finance and economic measures to really be able to bring about social change. Now, also as part of the midterm review of how the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Plan has been performing, how it has been working for Barbadians, and really how we have used the work program as a platform for growth. You know, I've been hearing some small noise in certain corridors that suggests that this Barbados Labour Party government is not focused on growth. And I think perhaps some may have missed it, because what we have been able to do is to use the areas in which we must be compliant as part of an IMF program as a platform for growth. And Mr. Speaker, I will explain further what I mean. Under the IMF program, there is to be the non-accumulation of arrears. Quite simply, you have to pay people what you owe people. We did not see that under the previous administration. But we have come to government to make sure that we show Barbadians and that we are true to good governance by quite simply paying for what you consume, paying people what they're owed. And so at the beginning of this financial year, sir, government arrears stood at $577.7 million. And by September 30th, they were at $316.8 million. So that over the last 17 months, not just because it is a part of the IMF program, but because it is a part of the good governance that this Barbados Labour Party administration has sought to return and has indeed returned to this country, we saw that people received tax refund arrears in cash in the amount of $40.5 million. That SOE, state-owned enterprises, trade creditors, received in cash and bonds $176.2 million. And the arrears of central government to the private sector were settled in the amount of $29.6 million. What does this mean? It means that where some might see this as a restriction, where some might see this as something that is difficult to manage, the fact that you cannot accumulate arrears under an IMF program, we have actually been able to use the repayment of arrears to be able to stimulate economic activity in the country. Because when you refund individuals and companies their tax refunds, what then happens? They're able to take those resources, invest in their small businesses, invest in their medium-sized enterprises. They're able to take that new disposable income, and whereas before, because of the economic crisis that was created in this country, somebody like me may have stayed home and tried to polish your fingernails yourself. Or somebody like the Honourable Member for St. Michael South may have tried with varying levels of success to cut his hair himself or to mow the lawn yourself. It means now that you can once again engage those individuals, self-employed people, people who work for small companies, who run their own businesses. You can engage those people to provide those services to get economic activity going in the country again. And that is what I mean, sir, when I say that this government has been able to use structural benchmarks and other targets under an IMF program to get a country growing again. Mr. Speaker, sir, that is unheard of in any IMF program. That is what creative governance looks like. That is what happens when you understand that fiscal deficit starts with an F and not a PH. That is what...
Honourable, as in physical?
I see. I dare not use that expression ever. But, Mr. Speaker, this is the kind of approach, this is the kind of way of managing the economy that has put people at the center and that continues to do so. In my few remaining minutes, sir, I want to turn to another part of this government's economic program that has to do with the growth strategy. And those who may have been within the sound of my voice over the past few days and weeks may have said or may say that they have heard this before, but I have to re-emphasize it. And I want to do it once more on the floor of this honourable House. We have had to focus on recovery and stabilization of this economy. But the plan which guides us is called the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Plan. In it, it speaks about a strategy for growth, but I wish to go further now by speaking to 7 areas that this government has established as a platform for growth and development of Barbadian people. You know, I was asked recently about, someone said to me, you know, I hear all of this from you. I hear all of this plans for the economy. And these are great plans, but I want to know what is being done on the social side. And I said to the gentleman, I don't know why other economists come to work every day. But for me, the business of economics is about the provisioning of goods and services to people for their well-being and development. It is not about numbers. It is about people. And in fact, I make no distinction between economic and social inclusion, between economic and social justice. It is all about justice, sir. And so the growth strategy for this Barbados Labour Party administration, for this government, is people-centered. We are about people-centered development. It is the reason, sir, that in our plans for hotel and hospitality sector development, in our plans for how we approach planning and the approval of major developments, it is the reason, sir, that in the way we have framed the Carlisle Bay and Greater Bridgetown Area Reinvestment Program, that we have said to investors far and near that this is an investment strategy, but it is about how we use investment for the renewal and for the urban regeneration of that entire area that is captured by Bridgetown, by Carlisle Bay, and the larger area. This is not investment for the sake of investment. And that is why, through the use of our planning obligations, we have said to developers, one of the things that we are considering in being able to assess applications for incentives is how many decent jobs, decent lasting jobs, you are creating for Barbadians, and in particular those Barbadians who live in the areas surrounding the development. When you come to a country and establish a company, establish a hotel, you become a part of the community. And as you benefit from the patrimony of that small society, similarly, you have to be able to be a part of an ecosystem that is about that country's development. And that is how we are using our approach to planning and development to make sure that the communities, for example, in Beckles Hill, where my neighbor, the Honourable Member for St. Michael South, is very concerned about. That is why when we look at places like Ellis Village in Halls Road, the entire Halls Road area, the entire Carrington Village area, the entire Orleans and Chapman Lane and Bridgetown, those people, those communities have to be direct beneficiaries and will be direct beneficiaries of any investment effort that takes place in those communities. Investment cannot happen and leave people behind. That is not what this government that I am a part of is about. And so that is one of the ways that we have been reorienting and reinventing government to be able to establish a platform for growth in Barbados. That is one. The second is by reinvesting in education and skills and in health. And I'm not going to speak too much to that on this occasion. But I want to show people very clearly that this is a framework that this government has established. We have said, as part of the Burt Plan, the same Burt Plan document that some people seem to have lost or have forgotten what they read, we have said that this government is about creating a high-skilled, high-wage economy. I did not come, Mr. Speaker, sir, to public life to just simply create wage earning employment for Barbadians. My grandparents earned a wage, a low wage. My parents earned a wage, a low wage. And the reason that this generation of political actors and people engaged in governance in this country have come to public life and to service must be about creating intergenerational wealth for every class of Barbadians in this country. It is not just about giving somebody a pay packet to carry home when the Friday come. It has to be about creating the tools for that $10 billion in savings that is sitting idle in commercial banks earning less than 0.1% interest. That is why we have established things like growth and resilience bonds. And we are working with partners on being able to find new ways for people to invest their money, including through the credit union system. That is one of the reasons, sir, that we have ended the period in which the government spent more than it earned and ran deficits. You heard the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central speak earlier about the fact that we are actually running a surplus. I think that if certain members of the last administration try to spell that word, they will have to start with a PH too, because they have not seen it, had not seen it for many years. But this government has brought this country back to the place again where it is once again running a surplus. But in running such high deficits, sir, for that previous 10-year period, the last government did something else. What it did was it took up this country's savings because it was borrowing from Barbadians and having Barbadians invest their savings in government paper to be able to prop up their own expenditure. When we ended that, it meant that those savings were once again back into the pool of available resources for private investment. It means that people can actually earn a real return on their investment. So whereas government consumption used to crowd out private investment, that is no longer the case. And so we are helping to mobilize these savings, sir, into investment with new regulatory regimes like the growth and innovation market, growth and resilience bonds, regimes for crowd financing, crowdfunding and peer-to-peer lending, and really allowing Barbadians to invest in companies that their neighbor might have started, that a group of young men or young women in a community that they came from may have started, to be able to create a sound regulatory environment so that if you take up your money and put in a startup or put in something called a resilience bond where you're actually investing in resilient infrastructure for where you live, then that is the kind of return and that is the kind of investment that is going to be able to help create intergenerational wealth in this country. I talk about intergenerational wealth, why? Because we can no longer be targeting having won anything in a household. Every household must have an X. I think if every household has a university student, every household has an entrepreneur, that's great. But those people must be a part of the same household. Why? Because if you are only creating opportunity for one member of a household, you are really creating a level of dependency on one income or one source of finance that does not create the level of well-being that you might create if you give every single member of that household, with whatever small amount of money they have, the opportunity to invest. And we saw it. We saw it, for example, when the last administration removed free tertiary education at the University of the West Indies and other tertiary institutions. Because when we were able to recommit and reintroduce free tertiary education, we saw that it increased the level of disposable income in those households. I had several of those households in Carrington Village in St. Michael South Central. And in cases where you have a grandmother on a pension income trying to send a student to university, those things cannot be right. And when you reintroduce free tertiary education, it is not for the sake of it. It is one, because education is the investment that has the highest returns in any society, bar none. But further, it is because when you remove that obligation on somebody's already small income, then you free up that income for them to do very fundamental things in that household. To be able to buy healthy food and avoid chronic non-communicable diseases. To be able to upgrade their infrastructure so that when a high income, it doesn't blow away the house. To be able to afford insurance. These are the things that you allow people to do with that increase in disposable income, sir. But another thing that the government of Barbados is doing as part of its growth strategy, I talked about reinvesting in education and skills and in health. I talked about reinventing government through things like planning obligations and revised planning and development legislation. I talked about reforming government finances so that we are no longer overspending, and so that those savings can then be reinvested, number 4, in the new financial instruments that we are developing. But I want to speak as well to the fact that we are also renewing traditional sectors in this country, like tourism. The people of Barbados saw that we were able to help set up Ross University within 6 months of coming to service as the government of Barbados. And that model of educational services or educational tourism is very important for the tourism product. Because whereas before, the focus may have been on your typical leisure tourist product, which remains important and remains key, we have to be able to expand what the notion of the visitor economy is. It's not just tourists in the traditional sense, but we realized that the arrivals and the economic activity from Ross University amounted to what would be an 11% increase in tourist arrivals in this country. That is significant. You saw that when the students, faculty, parents came, and we still see it happening, the flurry of economic activity in the country. The fact that supermarkets sold out and small providers of services had work again in the country. And so the revisioning of the tourism sector is really about a revisioning of the visitor economy. People will visit for educational services. People will visit for medical services. And so we have tremendous interest and applications before us as Town and Country Planning for specialist hospitals, oncology, orthopedic surgery, dental schools. And this is what the new visitor economy looks like. And one of the reasons that we can help provide quality health care as part of a new model is that we can provide, certainly to a US market at a lower cost, but with the comfort and with the framework of a very strong regulatory regime for the provision of health services. And that has to be backed up by your legal system, which is why we're also doing work on that front, to make sure that if there is a claim, if there's some reason that you have to have a legal matter resolved, that you also have the comfort of having that resolved quickly as well. But the other part of the reinvestment in traditional sectors like tourism has to do with how we encourage development of new infrastructure in the sector. I don't believe that the room stock of between 6,000 and 6,500 rooms moved much in the previous decade. But what we have with the strategic reinvestment areas, the 12 strategic reinvestment areas that we have looked at, that we've reimagined as we made that presentation in April of this year to investors and to Barbadians, is that all told, that entire presentation, that entire approach would add 3,000 rooms to the room stock. We anticipate that half of those we can see the groundbreaking on within the next 12 to 18 months. And you heard the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast a couple of weeks ago start to talk to the country about what some of those are, and the fact that where some projects had stalled for years because, I would say, of a lack of trust in the former administration and the past leadership, we are seeing a lot of excitement again. They didn't have any confidence on what this suite of measures and what this approach to economic management and to governance has done is to be able to restore confidence among domestic and foreign investors alike. And that, sir, is why we have, for example, as part of that strategic reinvestment in Carlisle Bay, we have work starting at the Pier Head. We have an application for a major development there by a regional investor. We have, for example, the former Caribbean Hotel, which will now be rebranded Indigo, which we also anticipate will start by the middle of 2020. We have investors who are willing to put and aiming to put a 20 million renewal investment in the Hilton. We have a new deal on Paradise. We have and are starting to settle the matters on the Hyatt so that construction can begin in next year as well. And I don't need to go through, again, we have the Royalton that is starting by April of next year. I don't need to go through again all of the projects on which we have secured commitment to project start and that an investment will happen. But this level of economic activity and investment interest, sir, is not a coincidence. It came, why? Because people saw that we were serious about reforming our process for planning applications. People saw that we were serious about our approach to fairness and transparency in how we deal with incentives and concessions and so on for major developments. People saw that this was and is a government that is ready to move because Barbadians are ready to move. And people saw further that this was not a government that was about enriching the few. And we have this perception sometimes that investors are all about the bottom line, and investors have to be about a bottom line. But there are also many of our partners in development, that's what I call them, sir. I say to our investor partners that you have to commit to being partners in this country's development. We saw in this region in the 80s and 90s a foreign direct investment trend that saw capital flight within 2 or 3 years. A company would come in, set up, start operations, make as much money as it wanted to make from this little Barbados or this little Jamaica and leave. That is not the kind of short-term, short-sighted partnership for development that we are encouraging in this country. And so we are creating a system of social investment as well, to make sure that alongside what people are spending or investing in their properties, that they're also investing in communities. And so reinvigorating traditional sectors like tourism, reinvesting in new financial instruments, and finally, number 7 of the 7 points that I wanted to share, re-engaging CARICOM and the world. You have seen, sir, the very strong leadership that the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast, the Prime Minister of Barbados, has given once again to the Caribbean single market and economy. And it is based, sir, on an understanding that in this global economic environment, it cannot be governments that are driving growth. It cannot be governments that are leading social and economic transformation. It has to be the private sector. And that is why a part of the CSME efforts are around the establishment or the engagement of the private sector as a part of that conversation. It makes no sense for governments to sit in a room day after day. We know what our problems are. We know what our challenges are. We all have the same challenges, largely in CARICOM, and we talk only to ourselves. And so part of the re-engagement of CARICOM is about bringing in the private sector and the regional trade union movement and starting to get serious and specific about what we're going to do. How are we going to address food security and food sovereignty as a CARICOM region? How are we going to mobilize the 50 billion in savings in CARICOM for the development of all CARICOM citizens? And how are we going to make sure that we continue to collaborate on critical issues of security and safety and the financial health of our economic system? Re-engaging CARICOM, re-engaging the world, looking at new trading and cooperation partners. This is all a part of our strategy for growth for Barbados and for the region. Because the notion that Barbados or any country in CARICOM is going to be able to stand on its own and figure out all its issues is one that we can no longer support. So, sir, I wanted to add those few thoughts to this debate, to be able to say that when we get up in here, sir, and talk about individual measures, yes, we have to do it in that way because we are introducing and seeking to debate individual pieces of legislation, but they are part of a strategy that has had the benefit, not just of social partners and of all Barbadians, but that have had the benefit of careful thought, but then, sir, also of action. Because you cannot just sit down and wonder about what to do. Once you are convinced that you have put your best effort into the thinking, then you have to execute. And that is what this government is committed to doing for the benefit and the well-being of every Barbadian citizen. And with that, sir, I'm obliged to you.
Honourable Member for St. Michael South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, sir. I wish also to add my voice in support of this bill, very briefly, and to say, sir, that like the Honourable Member before me who just spoke, sir, there is a need, I feel, to keep this conversation in context and to realize that all we do as a government, sir, is tied. We chose, when we were elected to office, to recognize and to share with the public that we do not govern in silos and that there must be a holistic approach to how we engage in the affairs of this country. So, Mr. Speaker, sir, there are just a few things that I wish to share, and I really do promise today to be brief, even though the Honourable Member for St. Peter may not agree that I can be. But, sir, the truth of this matter, sir, is in relation to developing countries now and our capacity to be able to influence the way we determine our own tax policy. And how it is that we should seek to govern a country, sir, recognizing that there is enough talent not only in this parliament, but in this country, sir, to be able to effectively determine the way that we want to go for ourselves. And it is interesting, sir, that there are many, some even in this country, sir, who may not believe that Barbadians have the wherewithal to be able to determine for themselves the policies that should be in place for a country like Barbados. And I say so, sir, cognizant of the fact that there are many international companies and organizations, sir, not even properly structured, who now seek to tell Barbados what policies they should implement as it relates to their tax policy. What taxes you should seek to have and what you cannot have and all kinds of things, sir. I am cognizant of it not only because we discuss it, sir, because I lived through the experience with the Prime Minister while we traveled. And to recognize, sir, that while I was in Romania, at the time when Barbados was blacklisted, sir, for what? For what? And to recognize that we were blacklisted not because we had done anything wrong, but because we had, sir, not according to the OECD and according to other persons, sir, not adjusted to suit them. And that every time we adjust, the goalpost is moved somehow, and we must readjust. And it seems that no matter whatever we do, enough is not good enough. And we keep making changes, sir, to our tax policy, sir, to be able to suit them. And the thing about taxes, sir, that I recall is that taxes should be clarity. And Barbados has always had a very clear tax policy. People should understand what they're paying a tax for, what are the different components of the tax and so on. We know it should be stable. You don't willy-nilly just adjust taxes. You don't come to Parliament, sir, and change a tax code. You don't just do that. You have to put a lot of thought into these things, and it should be fairly stable. And we know that, sir. But I fear that every time we make adjustments to our tax policy, sir, to suit other people other than ourselves, we're going to find ourselves having to make these adjustments over and over. Not only Barbados, but many developing countries, and certainly many developing countries in the Caribbean. You would recall, sir, that even after Dominica was impacted, Dominica got blacklisted, impacted by the hurricane. And all of us find ourselves in that position, sir, where we are exposed, not because we are not governing correctly, but because we are governing in a way that somebody else says, no, we no longer should be able to govern. And it is one of those things, sir, because you want to tell me what I can do and how I should govern, what my tax policy should be, but I can't tell you anything about yours, Mr. Speaker, sir. It is one of those things that I find that do not sit well with me at all. As a matter of fact, I think it now so offends the collective conscience of this country that it doesn't sit well with most Barbadians, period. That we are constantly making adjustments to suit people other than ourselves, calling Barbados a low tax jurisdiction. When the Prime Minister explained it so eloquently, when she said that how could we be low tax? When we have taxes on almost all of these different things, but we have chosen to structure our tax policy and our taxes in a way, sir, that would suit Barbados and Barbadians. And the challenge for me, sir, as it relates to our tax policy is simply that allow Barbadians to be able to implement a tax system that suits them, sir. And the question for some Barbadians, you know, people say sometimes that only poor people have to end up paying their taxes, and that rich people get away with not paying taxes. I am dealing, sir, at all times I speak in this Parliament, sir, as does the Honourable Member to my left, the Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central, and of course the one to my right for St. Peter, and all the members in this House. When we speak, sir, we speak about equity and what is fair all the time. You could almost hear any of us speak, sir, and we're going to be talking about what is fair, sir, and what is just and what is right. And I recall, sir, and I think I might have shared it in this House, sir, in history there was a conversation between a very powerful nation, Athens, and a not so powerful nation, Milos. And when they raised the issue of right, and they say right is only in question for those who are equal in power. And if we are not equal in power, there is no conversation about right. The strong will do what they will, and the weak must suffer what they must. and that attitude still prevails, sir, on the international scene, but that as we have determined to govern, sir, it cannot prevail here, because it's not going to be a case, sir, where those who have take advantage of those who do not have, sir. And when we make adjustments to our tax policy, sir, it must be to make sure that everybody in Barbados is able to benefit. Sir, when you implement adjustments to taxes, sir, it must also be cost effective. You don't implement taxes that cost you more money to try to collect the taxes, explain the tax, and administer the tax than it does. It can't cost you more money to do it than you would collect. And that is why, sir, when you look at a value-added tax, sir, you spend so much time making sure it's not supposed to be a cascading tax, but you want to make sure people at various points in the system, in the chain, pay the taxes that they're supposed to pay. Because it's supposed to be a tax, sir, that makes sense at the end of the day, and it must be convenient. And that all the things that we have done, sir, have been very convenient for Barbadians to be able to pay, and we've put a lot of emphasis into making sure that they understand it too. But we had a tax implemented in this country when the other government was in office that did not, sir, when you look at the various standards of tax policy and taxation, sir, it did not meet any of them. It was a tax, sir, it wasn't clear. You didn't know what you were paying it for. It wasn't cost effective. It was not convenient. Nothing about the tax made sense. But yet it was implemented as a tax in this country. And that everything that we do, sir, in this parliament, sir, since we came into office, as it relates to taxes, must make sense. And fundamentally, sir, it must be about the empowerment of people. And when you have something, sir, sometimes, you know, people may come and say, look, the government has done this, but not recognizing that we have also done that. I know, for example, sir, that most of us in this parliament, all Barbadians, sir, who work, would receive a little bit more, or should receive a little bit more monthly, because the income tax, the direct income taxes has gone down. Yeah. So you might receive a bigger paycheck. People, sir, may not say that they're receiving more money in their pay pack, but what they will say is that perhaps they have to pay more, some people, not all, because even though we have raised, for some people, land taxes, considering, sir, that we gave them back more money in their income taxes, and making sure, sir, that we've also done the reverse tax credit, there's still a very large number of Barbadians who don't have to pay at all. Because we have chosen, sir, to protect the most vulnerable in this country. And that is what good governance is about. And that is what, sir, leadership is about. And, sir, you know, people are saying that, you know, you should pay taxes according to those who are able to pay. And that's not a policy that will suit rich people, because people who have money are going to say, well, then I'm going to have to end up paying much more taxes than other people should have to pay. And people are saying it should be equitable, that everybody in the same circumstance should pay the same tax. But how do you know what a man's circumstances are? There's always going to be a conversation, sir, around taxes, no matter how you spin it. But for me and for you, I know, sir, because I keep reminding you, I know I speak for you sometimes in this house, because you can't speak for yourself, but I know that you're also a social scientist. And that at the end of the day, sir, as the Honourable Member for St. James, St. Michael, South Central said, if it does not come back to helping people, then what is the point? And I also know, because there was this romantic notion, though it is dangerous, this idea that the last government would perpetuate, so that you could somehow separate your economic policy from your social policies because it sounded good. But it is dangerous. And Barbados is not only an economy, it is a society, so that you could now come and say this is the economy on the one hand, and this is the society on the other hand, and you're governing on the one hand for your society, and you're governing on the other hand for your economy. So you could come, sir, and tell people all kinds of lies, and then downgrade after downgrade after downgrade, 23, 24 different downgrades in your country, and then telling people, sir, the economy and the society are separated, but who was suffering the most? Who was suffering the most? It was the same society, sir, the same person, sir, at the bottom that were suffering the most. The same people, sir, that they sought to come and mamagay and to tell all kinds of small lies were the people who were suffering the most. We came, sir, and we said we're going to be an honest government. We've put our cards on the table. Many people before us, before we came into office, said that Barbados needed to restructure its debt, sir. We said we were going to do it, sir. We came in and we did it. And we were honest from the start. and that there have been a number of things put in place, sir, to protect poor people, sir, particularly even as we go through an IMF program. I am amazed, sir, and I think Barbadians should know that when we travel, what people are talking about, they're not only talking about the brilliance of the Prime Minister, and they do. They're not only talking about the fact that we have been able to engage the IMF and to design our own program in a way, sir, that was so satisfactory to the International Monetary Fund and to others that we did it in record time. They're not only talking about the fact that that deal, sir, saw us being able to put things in place on the eve of signing the IMF program before we did it, Mr. Speaker, sir. But they are talking, sir, about the relationship that this government has chosen to have with its people, sir, at every single stage, sir, keeping them at the forefront of our development policy. And that is who we are. That is fundamentally what every bill that we bring to this Parliament is about. Every single bill. There is nothing, sir, that we do in the veil of darkness. We don't drive through our communities incognito. We don't hide from the people. Sir, Mr. Speaker, sir, at the end of the day, all that we are doing, sir, is in the interest of the people that we are asked to serve. And that I feel that this question, sir, of sovereignty for us is fundamentally important. A few years ago, sir, when I was speaking at a function, I can't remember where it was, but I did speak about this idea of de-risking. And that there were some banks, before it was happening, that were willing now, that were getting ready to pull out of the Caribbean, sir, because, you know, Barbados, not Barbados, but the region was risky. It wasn't worth it. And that there could be a risk of associating, sir, with us. There were also some people, sir, looking at Barbados, man. Looking at Barbados and saying that Barbados is a country that had done everything right almost throughout its history, that in the last 10 years had done almost everything wrong. And people don't want to do business in Barbados. I heard the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central speak this morning about people and the Barbadian dollar, sir. I will give you an example. I remember I was in Guyana a few years ago, before when the Barbados Party was in office, sir, not in the last 10 years. And I was spending money, and they said I did not have any U.S. currency while I stopped at the local shop. And the man said, here in my accent, are you from Barbados? I said, yes, I am. He said, we take Barbadian money here, man. He was willing to take our dollars just so at a shop. This is not in a place that changes money. Then, sir, a few years ago, back in the same country, I got my Barbadian money now because I know they take Barbados money in Guyana. And I whip up my Barbadian currency with pride, only to hear they don't take Barbadian currency now in Guyana. Because the last government, sir, had done so much to our dollar negatively that even the Guyanese were refusing Barbadian currency, sir. And when the former Prime Minister would get into this place and other places and suggest that the downgrades did not matter, because he was not seeking, he wasn't seeking to borrow on the international market, so the downgrades didn't matter. The honest reaction is that he couldn't borrow on the international market because nobody was lending Barbados any money. Such had become our reputation. And that the borrowing that was taking place in Barbados, sir, was against your future, your children's future and mine, and every single Barbadian in here, sir, because they were asking the central bank to do things that they shouldn't do, and they were borrowing from the NIS. And I read a report a few years ago, sir, in another place that said if we had continued at that rate, borrowing, that it was exposing all of us, sir, so that when we get to be the age of retirement, sir, we would not have the money in the NIS, sir, to protect us, sir. And that's a fundamental thing to Barbadians. And when I say that they jeopardize all of us, sir, I mean it. That government should never again speak on tax policy in this country. And when they see what the Honourable Member for St. Michael Northeast, the Prime Minister, has done, and what they see what the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central and the Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central have done, when they lead this economic team, sir, they should honestly just tell the truth and say they are doing it 1,000 times better than we ever could. So that everything we do, Mr. Speaker, sir, and I promise to be brief and there will be a long time for conversation, sir. But every time, sir, that I think about the transactions that happened in Barbados when they were in, and the transition that is happening in Barbados now that we are in, sir, it is chalk and cheese. It is chalk and cheese, sir. You have, sir, now young people, sir, the Honourable Member for Christchurch West Central understands. You now have young people in this country, sir, who feel hopeful, who say that maybe someday they may be able to pay for a little piece of the rock too like anybody else, sir. You have people, sir, in the fishing industry, many of the people with whom I know I do business, sir, who feel good to know that we are making changes, sir, on their behalf. There are people, sir, who had investments in CLICO. And if we are also honest, there are many people who had believed that the idea of getting money out of CLICO was nonsense, that we were never going to get our investment back out of CLICO. They were saying that was lost money. But this government came in, sir, and people are getting their returns now out of CLICO. And it makes sense, sir. And we have to be, at the same time, sir, we're trying to be reasonable. We're trying to be responsible, sir, even as we do this. And we are righting a lot of wrongs. Imagine, sir, for a second. Imagine. I mean, Einstein once said logic would take you from A to B, but imagination takes you everywhere. So imagine, sir, for a second if we had actually come in to a government that hadn't been the subject of 23 downgrades, sir. That wasn't the third most indebted country in the world, sir. And other places. That could not pay its bills. If we didn't have to be prospering, but if we had a chance to come in when things were just even, you would imagine what would be happening in Barbados now? That we are batting on one of the most difficult pitches, sir, and still playing shots. Imagine that if we had the opportunity, sir, to be able to come and play on a pitch that didn't even have to be favoring the batsman, but just giving us a little something, a little neutrality in the pitch. What Barbados would look like now. So we've been spending time getting the pitch ready. The next few years, sir, just getting the pitch ready. But imagine what we are going to be able to do in 2 years or 3 years when we have corrected the wrongs of the other administration, sir, and rolled the pitch to allow this Barbados Civil Party government to lead. Imagine that, sir. And that is why, sir, as I close, sir, I have no issue with the policies that the government has implemented, sir, whether it be in education. The Honourable Member for St. Michael South East is working diligently to ensure that we are able to correct a lot of these wrongs that are happening now. So because, societies don't fall apart in a day. Societies do not fall apart in a day. And people are acting as if the country fell apart in a day. It is because of all these things that have gone wrong, sir, that nobody even cared to pay attention to. It was as if Barbados was on automatic. The difference, sir, as I close, the difference between management and leadership, sir, in good times, a manager could save a country. You just want somebody coming to work, pretending to be working, and going long home when the day comes. That's okay, but when you're going through very difficult times, when the country is in crisis, sir, you need leadership, and that is what the government brings. And therefore, Mr. Speaker, sir, I support this bill, as I do, sir. And I do so clearly in my conscience, sir, recognizing, sir, that all we do, these little pieces are tied together, sir, to form one whole. And it is when you look at the whole, you will see the difference that this government is making to Barbados and to Barbadians, sir. Thank you.
Honourable for St. Michael South East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move that further consideration of this bill be postponed.
The question is that this honourable bill be postponed. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no, and we think the ayes have it. This bill is thereby postponed.
With that, Mr. Speaker, we've come to the end of today's proceedings. Okay. So you need to go back. Revert to government business then.
Oh, we work the government business.
He wants to leave.
Honourable for St. Joseph.
Of the Supplemental Cannabis Bill 2019.
First reading of bills.
Speaker, I beg to note that this bill will be read the first time.
The question is that this bill be read the first time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. Honourable
I
Mr.
beg
Marquis.
to move that this sitting be adjourned until Friday, the 22nd of November at 10 a.m.
Friday 27th.
The boy seconded that? Like when they walk up by.
The question is that this honorable chamber be adjourned until the Friday, the 22nd day of November 2019. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. This honorable chamber stands adjourned until Friday, the 22nd day of November 2019 at 10 a.m. in the forenoon.